Okay, in this unit, Unit 5, we'll begin our exploration of the epic conflict between the expanding Persian Empire and a rather motley collection of Greek poleis. Uh, as you can see from the text, we're looking at a 20-year period from 499 to 479 BC, in which we'll see what is largely a Cold War occasionally turned very, very hot, with two separate Persian strikes against the Greek mainland. And we'll look at the catalyst for this conflict, the Ionian Revolt. But first, I want to begin by taking a brief look at the Persian Empire itself and who some of the key players will be. Now, before moving on to the next slide, please do note from this illustration, on the bottom you see the Greek hoplites mixing it up with some Persian warriors. On the top, of course, you see the primary weapon system that the Persians will deploy, and that will be the bow and arrow. And the cultural gulf between the two sides on many levels will be very distinct, very, very different. In warfare, that of course is going to also play a role in how both sides have evolved. We know enough about the Greeks and their hoplite system of warfare. A little background on the Persians. They were one of several different nomadic horse groups that move into the area that is now modern Iran. And of course, as nomads, they're very comfortable on horseback, and they, of course, have picked up and have become quite adept at using the bow and arrow. And indeed, it was said of the Persians, the Persian boys from a very young age were taught three things: to ride well, to shoot well, and to always tell the truth. The truth being part of their religious belief system known as Zoroastrianism. So we see in kind of illustrated form here how the two sides are going to line up when things do come to blows. And of course, the different styles in fighting will play a role in who eventually will emerge victorious and who won't. So we'll begin with the founder of the dynasty, dynasty known as the Achaemenid dynasty, named after a figure of prominence somewhere in the family tree of King Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus will begin his long reign around 559 BCE. And he will begin to lay down the foundation of what will become the largest empire in history up to that point, up to about 500, 490 BCE. Now, the Persians themselves are going to, as I mentioned, be one of a number of nomadic horse groups that will eventually establish themselves along the Persian Gulf. Now, interestingly enough, they are initially a subordinate people to another group called the Medes, located just to the north of Parsa, or what we would refer to as Persia. And the Medes will dominate the Persians for a while, and this, though, will change with the arrival of Cyrus, who will lead the Persians first against their overlords, the Medes, and then against a number of neighbors, eventually, again, laying down the foundations for a very large empire. So Cyrus, again, is going to be the founder of this dynasty, but he won't be the only king of prominence that you and I will be looking at in this unit. But I should point out that as the expansion begins, it is Cyrus who will lay down the foundation by conquering roughly this area here, colored in red. Cyrus will be killed on campaign, though, in the east, going up against some people, the Scythians, who, there's a lesson to be learned here that perhaps by expanding too far, you may put yourself in all of your endeavors in jeopardy, and that's exactly what happens to Cyrus. But Cyrus, of course, will get the ball rolling by conquering this area, roughly colored in red. Cyrus will be succeeded by his son Cambyses, who will conquer. His main claim to fame is by bringing Egypt into the Persian Empire. Cambyses will be killed also on campaign. There's some very mysterious happenings and a lot of speculation as to what happened to Cambyses. Herodotus presents us with a theory that I'll explore a little later on in the next slide. But Cambyses, again, in blue, the Egyptian area, will be brought into the Persian Empire. After some drama in which there is, well, Herodotus believes it was a pretender to the throne, a Persian priest, a magus, whose name was Bardia, but who assumed the identity of Cambyses' younger brother Smerdis. And again, historians are not sure what to make of this. I think scholarly opinion right now swings towards not believing Herodotus' account. I won't go into it here because it's quite a twisting and turning account of events. But the long of the short of it is this pretender, if you will, Smerdis/Bardia, won't last very long. He will be found out by a relative, kind of a distant member of the family tree, the Achaemenid family tree, a guy named Darius, who will lead a coup against this pretender and ultimately will establish himself as the next king, the next great king of the Persian Empire. One of your readings in Herodotus will go into some detail on Darius's assumption of power and how he will take over after the pretender has been executed. Now, with Darius, we see further expansion of the Persian Empire to the east into the borderlands of India, and to the west into Thrace. And Herodotus talks a lot, describes in great detail Darius' campaign against the Scythian people of roughly southern Russia. And this turns out to be a real setback for Darius and the Persian Empire. They'd never really known defeat before. Cambyses had led an expedition against the Ethiopians, and that had not turned out well, but that was a logistical issue. This campaign, led by Darius against the Scythians, turns out to be a real military setback, and it should put the Persians on notice that perhaps again that expanding too far may not be in your best interest. So we see Darius, though, during his reign, we will see the Greeks and the Persians begin to get into a very, very serious confrontation. Now, here again is the timeline of the reigns of the various Achaemenid kings. Cyrus, followed by Cambyses, followed by the pretender Smerdis/Bardia, depending on whose account you believe. Smerdis was the name of the brother of Cambyses. Bardia was the Persian magus, the Persian priest, who assumed the identity of Smerdis and took power, as you can see, for about 7 months before he was found out and was executed by Darius, who then assumes power. Darius will be followed by his son Xerxes, who we'll look at in some detail in the next unit, Unit 6, in which we'll look at Xerxes' attempt to conquer mainland Greece. The image itself is from what's known as the Behistun rock, or the Behistun inscription, and it seems to have been commissioned by Darius himself, and it goes into some detail as to the background of how Darius basically discovered this pretender, found him out, and punished him, and then did the right thing by assuming power and keeping power within the Achaemenid family dynasty. but it's one of the great tourist attractions in the Persian area of the Middle East today. Very extensive, elaborate carvings with words that you cannot see that describe in detail the events that I've outlined in sketch form for you. So we see the Persian Empire conquering just about all of its neighbors and beyond. And I should point out that it was Cyrus who will conquer Lydia, the kingdom led by Croesus. We've talked a little bit about Croesus in the earlier unit, how Croesus will march against Cyrus and be defeated, and then Cyrus will take control of the kingdom of Lydia, including the Greek city-states, which had been under Lydian control. So now they're under Persian control. And so these Ionian Greek city-states are going to be the catalyst for the confrontation known as the Greco-Persian Wars.
Now, Herodotus recounts the Ionian revolt in Book 5 of his histories, and he goes into a very, very great detail on the circumstances surrounding the revolt, and he gives us quite a portrayal of some of the primary actors in this episode. I will sketch it out for you because it is of some interest. In part, again, as I mentioned, it serves as the catalyst for the broader conflict that will be known as the Greco-Persian Wars, which in many ways is the centerpiece of this course. So we've talked about this region of what is now coastal Turkey as being dotted with Greek city-states, this area called Ionia. Well, amongst these city-states, there was one shining jewel that was really head and shoulders above the other Ionian city-states, and that was the city-state of Miletus, which is located right here at the tip of my red arrow. And the tyrant of Miletus was a guy named Histaius. And I should point out that as a way of keeping peace amongst these Greeks in Ionia, the Persians encouraged the government of tyrants. They like to place their own hand-picked Greek in charge of everybody else, and that way it streamlined and simplified everything, and there would be some accountability. If the city-state was late in paying its tribute to the great king, then you had somebody whose door you could knock on, the tyrant of that particular city-state. And remember, tyrant is a term used to describe one man who's in charge of a polis and had achieved that position through extra legal methods. It wasn't quite legitimate, but as long as the tyrant kept the peace and satisfied his constituents, then it was a workable form of government, as Pisistratus of Athens has shown. So anyway, back on story here, the tyrant of Miletus is named Histaius, and he was a pretty crafty fellow, and he was ambitious, like most tyrants tend to be. And he gets an opportunity to serve the great king, Darius, when in the year 513 BCE, Darius decides to expand the borders of the Persian Empire. And he wants to go into southern Russia. So while it's outside the scale of my map here, we might imagine an invasion of the area that was controlled by a tribal group called the Scythians, who were nomadic. They were fierce fighters. And quite frankly, Darius didn't think that they would present much of a challenge to the might of the Persian Empire. So this is kind of a case of hubris that will foreshadow later developments when the son of Darius, Xerxes, decides to invade Greece proper. So in 513, Darius takes a very large, substantial army into southern Russia, crosses the Danube, and to do this, he builds a pontoon bridge. And this, of course, again, will be a technique that will later be used by Xerxes. When Xerxes invades Greece, he builds a pontoon bridge right here that will cross the Hellespont. But Darius builds this pontoon bridge, crosses the Danube into southern Russia, and the Scythians, rather than confront Darius and his Persian army head on, the Scythians simply melt away into the landscape, encouraging the Persians to come get them, going deeper and deeper and deeper into the vast steppe of southern Russia. And finally, Darius has to admit that, there's no way I'm going to fight these guys because I can't catch them. And of course, the Scythians are occasionally conducting raids on the Persian force when the Persians have let their guard down. So this turns into a type of guerrilla warfare situation, and those are very hard for conventional forces to deal with. And anyway, Darius, when he crossed the Danube into southern Russia to go after the Scythians, he had left behind the tyrants of many of the Ionian Greek city-states. He took contingents of men from each of these city-states, and these contingents were commanded by the tyrants of the city-states. So Darius decided to leave this Ionian contingent on the European side of the Danube, the southern side of the Danube. And he told these guys, if I'm not back by a certain amount of time, I want you to destroy the bridge and go home. And of course, time does pass. And there is an interesting debate that occurs between two of the tyrants. The first I've already introduced you to is Hystaius of Miletus. The second tyrant governs in this area here called the Thracian Chersonese, and his name is Miltiades, and he will be of keen importance a little later on in this lecture. And when Darius's army has not returned from the expedition in the allotted amount of time, Miltiades says, let us destroy this bridge, and even if the Persians are just running a little late, they'll be trapped on this side, on the far side of the Danube, and maybe the Scythians will destroy them, and we will all be free to govern without Persian interference. And we won't have to pay tribute to the Persians anymore because the great king will be killed and the army will be killed, and we will achieve a measure of freedom. Now, Hystaius disagrees with this and says, look, Miltiades, if we don't have the backing of the Persians, we have nothing. Our people will overthrow us. They'll probably kill us. So I say we stay in place and we keep this bridge open until and hope that the great king does return. So, sure enough, the argument of Hystaius wins over the rest of the Ionian tyrants, and the decision is made to keep the bridge in place. But it is one of history's great what-ifs if Miltiades had carried that argument and the bridge had been destroyed. So Darius does return back to the bridgehead and does cross back over with what's left of his army, and he is grateful to Hystaius for kind of keeping order when the great king was away, and he's certainly gratified to see that the bridge is still there, even though the time frame allotted for the return of the Persian army had since lapsed. So Hystaius is now the great king's favorite. He is Darius's favorite Greek tyrant, and Darius wants to reward him. And Hystaius, he knows how to pick his prizes. He asks Darius if he can govern, in addition to Miletus, a chunk of this territory here, part of Thrace. Even though the Persians had been ejected from north of the Danube, they still took control of quite a bit of this area here, which is on my map, this area of Thrace. And you know, if you're looking at this in hindsight, you can see that, you know, this is a very convenient road into further conquests, certainly into Greece itself. But that is still in the future. But anyway, Histiaeus asks for a piece of this territory to govern, and Darius says, sure, sure, absolutely. Now, this makes the other Persian governors who governed the interior of what had once been Lydia, but what we would call Turkey, the other satraps or governors raise their eyebrows at this, because they know Histiaeus. They know he's a very ambitious and crafty and very smart man, and they're wondering where his ambition will lead. And so in a private conference, the Persian nobles, the Persian satraps, governors, go to Darius and say, you need to rethink this, great king, because this guy really is somebody we need to keep an eye on. And this is an area that is very rich in mineral wealth and also very rich in timber. This guy could outfit his own fleet. And he's something of a wild card. So Darius is won over by this argument, but now he's got to figure out a way to not go back on his word. And so he does what a lot of corporate executives do. They promote upwards. They'll take somebody and promote them upwards. And in this case, Histiaeus becomes an advisor to the great king himself. And what that means is that Histiaeus has to go live deep inside the Persian Empire. He has got to give up control of Miletus as tyrant of Miletus, and also of the the new area that he has been given control of in Thrace. So he's put on ice, basically, put in kind of a gilded cage where he attends all the feasts and nominally advises the great king. But ultimately, he is out of the picture. Now, when he leaves Miletus, you got to have somebody in charge. So he puts his nephew, Aristagoras, in charge of Miletus as the acting tyrant. And Aristagoras is also a very, very ambitious person. And he wants to shore up his support with the Persians. I mean, he's a new guy in charge. He needs the backing of his Persian masters, and he wants to do something to ingratiate himself with them. So Aristagoras decides to take advantage of an opportunity that presents itself when on the island of Naxos, a type of civil war erupted. And this was a pretty common phenomenon in Greek city-states. Usually it was class warfare, the rich against the poor. And the Greeks had a term for it called stasis. And we'll explore that a little more when we get to the Peloponnesian War and the circumstances that led to that conflict. So Naxos is experiencing stasis, or civil war, and the aristocrats have all been ejected from the island. And of course they flee to Miletus, and they put their case to Aristagoras. They ask him if there's some way he can help them regain control of the city-state on the island. And Aristagoras doesn't have the resources himself, but he senses this opportunity to ingratiate himself with the Persians. So he goes to the Persian governor, the Persian satrap, and pitches the idea that Aristagoras will supply some ships and will supply some intelligence if the Persians actually supply some troops. And the Persian satrap agrees to this, but right from the beginning of operations, things begin to go wrong. The Naxians, the poor folk who are in charge now, they get tipped off that there is an invasion coming their way, and they put up stiffer resistance than expected. And they are able to push back this invasion force. And of course, the Persians don't like failure, and Aristagoras knows that he is sort of in trouble here with the Persians, and he does quite an about face. He goes from being the tyrant of Miletus to suddenly inciting rebellion amongst his fellow Greeks of Ionia. And he becomes sort of the spark that lights up this Ionian revolt. He convinces his fellow Ionians that they have been oppressed by the Persians for too long, and now is the time for them to gain their freedom. So Aristagoras goes from being the best Persian ally ever to being their nemesis, because the complaints are received with open ears by the Ionians. There had been some grievances. When Darius became great king, he wanted a standard level of tribute from each of his territories, and he was very careful on how he determined what each region would pay. And this took the Ionians aback, because occasionally they had to pay sporadic tribute payments, but now they're going to be required to pay regularized tribute, and this really rubbed them the wrong way. So this was one of many grievances. Also, we have to remember that the Athenian democracy by this time, and this time now is about 499 BC, the Athenian democracy has been established and shows itself to be a workable model, and this is not lost on the Ionians. And so one of their grievances, of course, was that they were governed by tyrants who were nothing but puppets for the Persians. And now you have this alternative form of government, the form of government called democracy. And so the Ionians, to make a long story short, rally around Aristagoras. Now, he is shrewd enough to recognize that there is no way that with the resources available in Ionia, the military resources available, that they will ever be able to withstand the might of the Persian Empire. They need help. They need allies. So Aristagoras boards a ship and heads to Greece, and he's going to travel first to Sparta and then to Athens. But he's really hoping that the Spartans will help him out, because of course the Spartans are the A-team. They are the best military force that the Greeks have. And if Sparta throws in with the Ionians, then maybe this rebellion has a fighting chance. Now, unfortunately for Aristagoras, when he pitches his plan to the Spartans, he pitches it in front of the Spartan assembly. He initially sugarcoats this by reminding the Spartans how tough they are, and really downplaying the military ability of the Persians. And he reminds the Spartans how wealthy the Persian Empire is, and he makes it seem like this is going to be a walk in the park. But he falls flat when the Spartan king, Cleomenes, asks Aristagoras, so how far away exactly are these people? If we're going to confront them, we have to know how long the army is going to be on the march. And Aristagoras basically says, well, it'll take you a few months to get there. And King Cleomenes is like, what, a few months? Just to be able to confront the enemy, let alone how long the campaign will last. Cleomenes is like, there's no way, get out of here, guy, pack your stuff. And this, of course, is because the Spartans did not like to send significant military forces out of the Peloponnese for any lengthy time period. The Spartans were always concerned with a Helot revolt. So this is a non-starter for the Spartans. And, well, Aristagoras has better luck when he arrives in Athens, and he, again, pitches the same sort of plan to the Athenians, the same sort of enticements that the Persians are weak and effeminate, and the Persian Empire is very rich. So the Athenian assembly decides to help out the Ionians. Now, I should point out that, of course, there was a kind of a kinship relationship here. The Ionians looked to Athens as a type of mother city, and the Athenians speak the Ionian dialect also. So there is that type of kinship relationship that is felt between the two groups. So the Athenian assembly votes to send 20 triremes and a force of hoplites to Ionia to help out the Ionians. Now, this is not a very big force. Another city-state on the island of Euboea, the city-state of Eritrea, will also kick in a few triremes and some forces, but it's a very modest force. And unfortunately for the Greeks, it's not going to be enough to tip the scales in favor of the Ionians, but it will be enough certainly to bring down the wrath of Darius, who is wondering what these Athenians are doing, interfering in what he feels is a domestic affair of the Persian Empire. So the Athenians do arrive in Ionia. They have an initial success. They wind up burning down the provincial capital of Sardis, most of the capital city. But that moment of success is followed by some pretty significant reverses, and the Athenians kind of throw up their hands and take off after a very, very brief deployment. But again, they've involved themselves in Persian business, and the great king will not forget this. Now, the Ionian revolt in total will last for about 5 years, but again, after some initial successes, it's all about the Persians gathering enough forces to crush this revolt. And at a naval battle fought off the coast of Miletus, actually, at Lade, the Battle of Lade, the Ionian navy is defeated, in part because many of the Ionian contingents melted away when the battle was about to begin. The Persians were able to either bribe or convince some of these Ionian Greeks not to participate in the battle, and the Ionian fleet falls apart, and the remnants is defeated, and the revolt is crushed by 494. Now, once the Ionian situation has been cleaned up, great King Darius is going to turn his attention on punishing Athens. And we have an initial attempt to strike at the Athenians when we get a land-sea expedition that is sent off sometime around 492 BC. So about 2 years after the Ionian revolt is crushed, Darius gathers a force, and again the land route, the land army is going to follow this route here. The naval contingent, which is supporting the army, will follow the coastal route here. But this effort falls on disaster when off the tip of the Mount Athos Peninsula, right here, a massive storm brews up and destroys most of the fleet. And this is kind of an epic disaster that forces the cancellation of Darius' attempt to punish the Athenians. But he is not going to give up. And 2 years later, in 490 BC, the great king is ready to go for round 2. And having learned his lesson that the waters of the northern Aegean are rather difficult, Darius orders a force, a limited force, to embark on boats and sail into a more direct route and find a suitable landing point within striking distance of Athens, and then punish the city, burn it to the ground. And accompanying this Persian fleet is the former tyrant of Athens, you may remember Hippias, who had been expelled, and that cleared the way for the ultimate development of democracy. Well, Hippias has been cooling his heels in Persian territory around the fringe of the Persian Empire. And when he gets wind of what's about to happen, he volunteers his services as a guide. And so Darius takes him up on this, and Hippias actually says, "Look, I know a perfect landing place for a fleet this size. There's a sandy beach area near a village called Marathon, and I think that we'll be in good shape, and certainly will be in striking distance. Marathon is only about 24, 25 miles away from Athens, so it's a relatively brief march, and again, it's a good harbor for a very large fleet. So the fleet sets sail and manages to first punish the tiny little city-state of Eritrea that also had sent forces to help the Ionians, and then jump across the island from the island of Euboea to coastal Attica to the beach area at Marathon, where the stage is set for one of history's epic confrontations, and quite frankly, one of history's epic upsets. I am describing, of course, the Battle of Marathon, and so we see the Persian army landing on the sandy beach at Marathon, roughly 24, 25 miles from Athens. Now, as soon as the Athenians had heard that the Persians were headed in their direction, they sent out a day runner, a guy named Phidippides, who they call him day runners because he could run all day. And Phidippides was tasked with running to the Peloponnese, to Sparta, and seeking aid immediately. Unfortunately for the Athenians, the Spartans are involved in a religious festival called the Carneia. It was one of their most sacred festivals, and they informed Phidippides to let his people back in Athens know that the Spartans cannot leave until the next full moon, and that was about a week away. And if you factor in the time necessary for an army of Spartans to march from the Peloponnese to Marathon, you're looking at a 10-day window. And this is disheartening, to say the least, to the Athenians. But nevertheless, in defense of the polis, the Athenian hoplites muster and march to confront the Persian invader at Marathon. Now, what we're looking here as far as forces are concerned, the Athenians were thought to have mustered somewhere between 9 and 10,000 hoplites. They were joined by a tiny little neighboring city-state of Plataea that contributed about 800 hoplites of their own as a show of solidarity with the Athenians. And the Persians are thought to have brought with them on boats about 20,000 infantry, but more importantly, about 1,000 cavalry. So they had actually packed up horses on transport ships and brought some of their cavalry with them. And this is significant because, of course, the Athenian hoplites have no corresponding way to defeat cavalry, particularly horse archers that could get behind the phalanx and wreak all sorts of havoc. So the horses are a very real concern for the Athenian generals. Now, as far as generals go, you have 10 generals who are sharing command of this Athenian Plataean force, and amongst those generals is none other than Miltiades, the tyrant we had talked about 10 minutes ago in this video lecture, who had argued when Darius had ventured into southern Russia to fight the Scythians. The tyrant Miltiades tried to convince his fellow tyrants to strand Darius's army in Russia as winter approached, but he was basically out-debated by his contemporary, the tyrant of Miletus, Histiaeus. But Miltiades had run afoul of the Persians when he had joined in the Ionian revolt, and he had to flee from the area that he governed, the Thracian Chersonese, and he winds up in Athens. He had a family history in Athens, so it was the only place left for him to go. Now, he did have significant military experience, and he knew how the Persians fought. He had fought alongside the Persians when he was in the good graces of the Persian Empire. So he was a very, very respected for his knowledge of Persian fighting methods and his ability to figure out what the Persians might do at any given moment. So Miltiades is going to, although he's one of 10 generals, the other generals show him due deference. And when the time comes, they will rely on him to call the shots. So we get this situation where there is a type of standoff that takes place for about a week, almost a week, in which the Greeks are up on the high ground, and the Greeks are in blue here in this map and all subsequent maps. The Persians are red, and you can see where the Persian fleet has been beached. And again, there's this sort of standoff. Neither side wants to make a move. But the Achilles heel of the Athenians is this nagging feeling that there is a treacherous element within the city of Athens itself that will betray the city. And of course, the Persians do have ships. They can send a force by ship south down the coast of Attica and round the tip of Cape Sunium, and get into Athens itself, because of course all the fighting men are here on the plain of Marathon. So that is a big concern for the Athenians. For the Persians, we might imagine supply is a concern. You've got a pretty sizable army of 21,000 men and 1,000 horses. You got to keep these guys fed and with clean water. So both sides have their concerns. And this stalemate breaks up in a story that is not really recounted in Herodotus, but comes to us from another source. But it does make sense. It is said that sometime on the evening after a week of stalemate, there is some noise. Noise of somebody approaching the Greek position, and the Greek sentries call out who's there, and it turns out to be some Ionian sailors who have been pressed into Persian service as part of this fleet. And these Ionians want to desert to the Greek side. They don't want to fight for the Persians. So they basically throw out a piece of key information. They say, the horse are away. The horse are away. Now, of course, again, I mentioned that the Persian cavalry is a big deal here, and if the Persian cavalry are somehow removed from the equation, now the Greeks feel very confident, because even though they're still outnumbered, they do have a great deal of faith in going man to man against the Persians, that they would emerge victorious. Now, what this means, the horse are away, has caused a great deal of scholarly debate. Some scholars believe the Ionians are referring to the fact that all the horses were being watered at a stream somewhere over here, so they were kind of far removed from where the likely battlefield would be. Another possible option that I support is that the Persian commanders, a Persian guy named Artaphernes and a Mede named Datis, had decided to split their forces and do what I just described, that the Athenians dreaded most. Take half their force, or certainly take a substantial part, including the cavalry, put them on ships, sail them south and then around the tip of the Attic Peninsula, and then with this quick strike force made up of largely of cavalry, go right for Athens, and the city would be betrayed from inside by treacherous Athenians, perhaps supporters of Hippias. and that would secure for the Persians control of the city, while the fighting strength of Athens is still out on the plain of Marathon, being held in position by the remaining Persians. So if we might imagine this, we now sense, as Miltiades did, an opportunity, because the Persians have split their forces. Persian cavalry is out of the equation. The numbers are a little bit more even. It is time to take decisive action, and that's exactly what, thanks to Miltiades, the Athenians will do. It is Miltiades who convinces his fellow generals that the moment is now. And he also convinces his fellow generals to take two very prominent risks. The first risk was changing the structure of the phalanx. Now, even though the numbers were probably, the odds were better as far as numbers go, the Persians still outnumbered the Greeks and could possibly outflank the phalanx if the phalanx wasn't somehow lengthened. Well, Miltiades decides to lengthen the phalanx, but the way you do that is you have to thin out the center ranks. So in the center, rather than being 8 men deep, as was typical for a Greek phalanx, sources believe it was only 4 men deep. So this was necessary to lengthen out the phalanx, but also Miltiades may have had something in mind here, because he also wants to strengthen the outer flanks, the left and right outer flanks of his phalanx. And this is very risky indeed. But if that wasn't risky enough, Miltiades also orders his men, when they reach a position roughly about a tenth of a mile from the Persian line, he wants them to break into a running charge. And this would be very unusual, because a phalanx has got to maintain its cohesion, and if you if you give everybody the order to just start running, well, you know, different hoplites can run at faster or slower paces, so the phalanx itself could break up. But this was necessary from Miltiades' perspective, because the Persians had always brought with them large numbers of archers, and Miltiades wants to get his phalanx in and out of the kill zone being about, you know, that 200-yard area where the archers can have most effect, and weaken the phalanx by launching arrows and killing many of the hoplites before contact is even made. So these risks do pay off. The battle itself is joined, and we'll take a look at it in a moment in some detail, but I will tell you that according to Herodotus, it is a massive defeat for the Persians. They will lose 6,400 men, compared with only 192 Greek casualties. So as the battle begins, we see the Greeks here with their thinned out center and their strengthened flanks, about the same size as frontage goes with the Persian force. And coming down off the high ground, we imagine that the Greeks have you know, the wind at their backs, and they are of course fighting for their homes, for their families, for everything they hold dear. So there is that added element of adrenaline rushing through their veins as they make contact with the Persian force. And we might imagine the clash and the sound being quite striking. As the two sides collide, of course, that thinned out Athenian center is going to give way. Now, the crucial point of this battle seems to have been if the Athenian center can hold on long enough for the strengthened flanks, the strengthened Greek flanks, to push back the weaker Persian flanks, because of course the Persians had their best troops in the center. Well, the Athenian center does hold, and the strengthened Greek flanks do wind up pushing back, and ultimately shattering the right and left flank of the Persian line. And of course, those Persians immediately raced to the boats in an effort to escape the slaughter. In a remarkable show of discipline, the Greek flanks do not pursue the fleeing Persians. Instead, they rally themselves, they reform, and they begin squeezing in on the rear of the Persian center. So in very short order, the Persian center, which had thought it was on the cusp of victory, finds itself surrounded front and back, and within a relatively brief period of time, the Persian center itself will shatter, and those Persians are going to race towards the remaining boats, and they will be cut down by the thousands by the Greeks, who know that this is their chance to have a decisive victory. And what is really remarkable is that after the conclusion of the battle, when the Persians have been vanquished at Marathon, the Athenian hoplites have to form up and begin a forced march from Marathon itself back to Athens, because again, according to this account of the battle, the Persians had split their forces, and that naval contingent, by the time the battle is over and the Athenians are on the march, is approaching Athens itself from the sea. So, according to Herodotus, the Athenian hoplites do manage to make this 24-25 mile trek in full gear in time to suit up outside the city of Athens and basically face down the Persian fleet. The Persians had not yet begun to disembark, and when they saw that this army was prepared to defend Athens, the Persian commanders basically just packed up and went home. Now, from the Athenian perspective, this is a monumental victory. Indeed, Athens will gain a great deal of prestige from this victory. The Spartans managed to arrive shortly after the battle is concluded, and they tour the battlefield, basically checking out the carnage that the Athenians have wrought on the Persians, and the Spartans basically give them a thumbs up. And the men who fought at Marathon will be given many honors, and the 192 Greeks that were killed there are given the highest honor of all. They're buried on the battlefield, and to this day you can go to Marathon and see the burial mound, the Soros as it's called. So this does, for the time being, keep Athens free from Persian control. But from the Persian perspective, this is a relatively modest affair, and the Athenians will not escape the punishment of the great king. It's only a matter of time, and so almost as soon as word gets back to Darius that his initial force has been defeated at Marathon, he begins planning for round two. And that's where we'll pick things up in the next unit when we look at the second invasion of Greece.